All right, we are going to run through, or I'm going to go through a presentation that I did and have edited for you. Oh gosh, back in Virginia, maybe 6 years ago. It's been a while ago now, maybe 7. But this is all about dyslexia. This is before Virginia went to the science of reading. I presented this at a Title I conference for the school district and at the Virginia Reading Association. So we are going to get started. So in this presentation, we've got facts and myths, at-risk characteristics, and some accommodations. Marianne Wolf has 2 amazing books. Reader Come Home is a fantastic book, and The Proust and the Squid. This quote is discussing how reading develops over time, and that it takes years for the brain to acquire the skills needed for a student to become a fluent and developed reader. So reading in any language develops over time. Reading never just happens, not a word, a concept, or social routine in the 2,000 days that prepares the brain for a reading acquisition. It is all there from the start, or not, with consequences for the rest of children's reading development and for the rest of their lives. So I think that's a very impactful quote, and the book it came out of is The Proust and the Squid. So what is dyslexia? And what comes to mind when you hear the word dyslexia? Some of you may think of famous people. It may be a medical diagnosis, seeing letters backwards. If they aren't paying attention, they're just not trying harder. Some of these are myths. Some of these are true. It's overdiagnosed, lack of educational opportunities. They just tried harder. It's caused by a brain injury. That is not, that's alexia. And will they outgrow it? So we're going to continue to talk about what dyslexia actually is and what it is not, because it is not seeing letters or words backwards. Okay, and it is not caused by poor eyesight. So the things that are marked out are not what it is, and it's not seeing words and letters backwards. That should have been marked out also. So here is the International Dyslexia Association definition. Dyslexia is distinguished from other learning disabilities due to its weakness at the phonological level. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin, and is characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in phonological component of language and is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities. And the provision of effective classroom instruction, secondary consequences may include problems in reading and reduced reading experience that can impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So when a student struggles to read fluently or struggle to decode, it can impede their growth in vocabulary and background knowledge. So it is a learning difference that is inherited. It makes learning to read and write and spell difficult. It's unrelated to intellectual ability, and usually they have average to above average IQ. It can affect spoken language, written language, and language comprehension. Dyslexia ranges from mild to profound, can affect 1 out of every 5 people. when they require extra time to process and retrieve language information. And who is affected? 10 to 20% of the general population. Does not discriminate. Boys and girls are both affected equally. Children and adults. All socioeconomic backgrounds, all races and ethnicities, and it affects all languages. So at-risk warning signs, red flags by grade. Oh, I have a handout that I'll attach at the end of this too. Difficulty learning the alphabet, names and sounds, remembering shapes of letters, difficulty generating or identifying rhyming words and counting syllables, hearing and manipulating sounds and words, deleting, counting, segmenting, and blending phonemes, difficulty distinguishing the different sounds of words, difficulty learning to read and spell, reversing letters or order of letters, misreading or omitting common small function words like the, a, and, stumbles through longer words, slow, laborious oral reading, poor reading comprehension, rapid memory recall is low, and having an ability to process information, but may need more time. So there are reversals or mirror writing and spatial orientation. This is part of the visual system, and it is recycled, it had been recycled for reading. So when they struggle with reversals, it is because their brain is still struggling with, excuse me, storing the information in that spatial orientation and anchoring it to something. So B, D, P, and Q, of course, looks all the same. So they need to anchor it to something. So if we can get a student to, handwriting is a great way to help students with this. So if they can anchor that B to straight line down, big belly, and that D to circle around, straight line up, and see it visually on the paper the way that it needs to look. And again, that P is a basement letter with a long line down and a belly. If we can visually help those students to anchor those letters on the line where they go, it will help them with their letters. So handwriting helps students anchor letters where they go, and their visual cortex, because it's been recycled for reading, can really, I'm not getting my words out correctly, can start to instead of have the letters float in space, be anchored in the lines where they need to go. So because by developmentally, reversals will sometimes occur through age 7. It's not always dyslexic students that do this. In fact, because both of my boys are dyslexic, only one of them reversed consistently. He can, my oldest reversed, I think, until he was about 5, but he anchored those letters fairly well early on, and then did not reverse after that. My youngest, who is very spatially oriented, but he has such a low working memory, and a slow recall, it took him a very long time to stop reversing. And now we see him reverse when he's really, really tired, or when he's learning something new, and he's in high school. So it's not that he doesn't still reverse, he does, but we see it more when his brain is really tired, or his cognitive load is so high that his brain kind of reverts back to just that reversal. I don't know any other way to explain it. It's not that he doesn't know any better, it's that his his brain kind of gets tired, really. And his hand and his brain just kind of go back to that. So it occurs more frequently in dyslexics, but it doesn't always happen. So in a typical reader, the things that you will see is that reading achievement and intelligence are linked across development. So they develop in the same rate over time. And an increase in one produces an increase in the other. So they go hand in hand, one predicts the other. But in dyslexics, you do not see that they're linked over time. Their intelligence and their reading ability are not always linked. So their reading ability may be lower than their intelligence. Their intelligence is continuing to grow, right? And you see that it's going, but their reading ability may stall or be stagnant for a little bit. So their vocabulary will be high, but their reading ability is not keeping up with that. So they don't move at the same rate, right? And their fluency is not at the same rate that their vocabulary would indicate that it should be. So it's not developing at the same rate that you would think that it should. So what is happening in our dyslexic and beginning and skilled readers? So our beginning readers are using that parieto-temporal system, that word analysis, because they're still trying to really decode those words. They're learning letter sounds and they're pulling words apart and they're trying to put them back together. They're still in that very beginning decoding reader stage. Our skilled readers are using that occipital-temporal cortex, that word form area, which a lot of the words that they know have become sight words for them. If, for lack of better term, I'm going to use the definition of a sight word right now as a word that a student knows instantly, not a high frequency word. So if a word has become a sight word for a student, they recognize that word on sight. They do not have to decode it. So no decoding needed. But our dyslexic students are relying on that Broca's area. They are having to really rely on that word analysis for them to read. The occipitotemporal area is underactivated, and they're just not, their system is not as fast. That's why they're not as fluent of a reader. Does it work? Yes, it's just not as fast of a system for them to read. Can they read accurately? They can, but it's not as fluent if they read this way. So that's why explicit systematic instruction is very important for these students, because it will help them learn how to and start to rewire the brain so it becomes a faster route for them to learn and rewire and read. So in a dyslexic brain, again, that Broca's area is larger, and that's why we need to do that explicit intervention to help them learn how to use these other areas, their word form area and their word analysis area, so they can make these new connections and try to get all of these areas working together. So our dyslexic students also store information differently. So a typical brain will store information very systematic and organized and beautiful. So I like to compare it to a deck of cards. So when you organize a deck of cards, you put all of the same suit together. You may put all the kings and queens together. You may put all of the hearts or the jacks, all the spades together, or all the diamonds. Dyslexics don't always do that. So they may know something about turtles and they may put it in one part of their brain, and the next time they hear something about turtles, they may put it in the other part of their brain. So dyslexic brains a lot of times look like the bottom picture, where it's really like 52 card pickup. So they may have a whole lot of information. It just may be stored all over the place. So a lot of times we need to help them learn how to organize and store a little bit better. And that's where, again, that explicit systematic instruction comes in, and all of the accommodations that we put into place for them. Graphic organizers are a great way to help them try to reorganize. So that leaves me to the next thing after this. If you do suspect that you have a student that is dyslexic, there are some data points that you can collect, and to help if you want to move forward with testing. This seems a little out of order in my slides as I see where I put this, but if you have a phonological awareness screener that you have done, any phonological information, even if it's informal, you can collect that. If your district does a dyslexia screener, any of that data. The TOPA, if you use that, if they're still struggling on any of that. Spelling assessment, that's the DSA. Language skills checklist. There's a dyslexia screener in the IDA handout that can be used. Any informal or formal teacher collected data, you can start making a folder with student data in it, and talk to the family, talk to the parents, see if there's a history of reading difficulties or struggles. So that's just some data that you can collect on a student if you think that a student is suspected of being dyslexic. But that dyslexia screener would show if they're at risk also. So I gave you some sample accommodations. I did not list goals because the goals for any student is going to be based on student need and data driven. So just like accommodations, they're going to be different and be driven by data and need. But I gave you some samples here. Extra time is very common for students with dyslexia. Alternative ways to respond in writing, orally, drawing, PowerPoint, slideshows, videos, speech to text are alternative ways to respond for anything over 2 sentences. Student created checklists for editing, written response. There's many more accommodations for students. I just listed a few, but there are so many more out there. And then the ladder of reading, I like to show this visual because students even above the 10 to 15% of dyslexic students that fall within this 75% on the ladder of reading benefit from the explicit and systematic instruction, just like that 10 to 15% of dyslexic students do. So I'd like to show that visual also. And any references that I use to gather information I listed at the bottom. So that is the information I have for you on dyslexia. Please reach out if you have any questions. And I will also post the PowerPoint, the slideshow for you on the module.